Hi, everybody. Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. Really excited today because I've got Kathleen Glass with me all the way from California. We're going to talk about GDPR and CCPA, and I'm really excited because I actually had to read up on CCPA before I actually came on this call. I know a lot about GDPR, well, but I hopefully do. Before we go any further, though, Kathleen, tell us where people can get hold of you.
Certainly. I am on LinkedIn, and my name is pretty easy. It's Kathleen Glass, Glass, Kathleen, Kathleen. So you can find me on LinkedIn there. And also that's my Twitter handle as well, at Kathleen Glass.
And you're very active on social anyway. And we met on social. So
we met on social.
Yeah. And you're very active. So if people make contact, reach out to you and contact you, that you will contact them within at least 8 hours or something like that.
Exactly. Depending on your time zone.
Yes. Yes. So we're talking about GDPR and CCPA. These are just like four, is it that they're 4-letter acronyms? We ran out of 3-letter acronyms. Yes. We decided to move on to 4-letter acronyms. What explains to everybody what GDPR and CCPA is?
Well, what they both are privacy legislation, because the consumers have really become frustrated by the data breaches, by this feeling of intrusion. And so what we're really finally finding is that the consumers are pushing back and saying, no, you can't do anything you want with my data. I want to be able to opt in, or I want to be able to say opt in as in GDPR, or I want to be able to tell you explicitly, no, you may not sell my data. And I think we've gotten a little bit complacent about it. And so we're finally waking up and saying, no, you may not, as in the case of CCPA, sell my data.
And I think that this is a certain amount of maturity of the internet age of, we've lived in the Wild West. I mean, as we move towards the date of GDPR, so GDPR came in May, the end of May 2018, and CCPA is on the 1st of January 2020. Yes. So with GDPR, I think what we found was that the Wild West, which was people thought you could do anything. I'll take all the data, I'll leave, go and work at a new company, then set that up, and then we'll start mailing you. And I usually say to people, so would you do that with your mother's data? and your mother's credit card details and stuff like that. And usually they say, no, that you don't understand, Tim. This nothing to do with my mother. And it's like, no. Whether it's your mother, my data, or your data, actually, it's really important.
It is.
So why do you think that this has changed?
I think, I certainly know in my case, it's breach after breach after breach, big names, I'm part of Facebook, I'm part of Marriott, I'm part of Experian, it was, I think about 2 years ago, we rolled out national laws to say, at least we need to be notified of these breaches. And I think that might have been the tipping point of the awareness, was the notification laws that we've got. And so now, as opposed to hiding it for years or never hearing about it, that, oh, your data's gone, your data's out there on the dark web. Now that the notifications are mandatory and we're hearing about them, it's like, oh my gosh, how do we stop this? How do I protect my data? And I think that was part of the catalyst of the realization that this was happening.
And this is this B2B and business to consumer?
This is, yes. And even though CCPA is called the Consumer Privacy Act, California Consumer Privacy Act, we mean everybody. And that means devices and households as well. So it really applies to everybody.
Okay. Which is slightly different to GDPR, because in GDPR, some people feel that they can get round it by talking about work. I always find it rather, when people say, what we need to be is really cool with people's data, but we need to find a way around it. You need to find a way around being nice to people and being decent with their data. So we talked about that. So CCPA comes in force on the 1st of January. So there must be a lot of people in the States getting ready for that then.
Interestingly enough, no, and it's shocking. And we've been, I've been reading the studies, we've been talking to folks, and I would say the studies show maybe a third of the really big companies are ready.
Right.
But if you think about the really big companies, those are also probably folks that already knew that they had to deal with GDPR and had some sort of structure and people and the DPO and all that in place anyway. I would say the other three quarters, there's maybe another third that are staggering along a little bit, but will not be done by January. A lot of the surveys say that next third will be ready probably next June, middle of the year. And then the rest of the third are what my colleague calls compliance complacent. And they're like, yeah, whatever. or ignorant, don't even know what we're talking about, or think it doesn't apply to them, or just like, la 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 la.
So CCPA is the Californian Consumer Privacy Act. Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna ask you some open questions. So with GDPR, if you market to me, because I'm still currently in Europe, if you market to me, even though you're in the States, you have to comply with GDPR. Mm-hmm. So are we saying that this isn't just for companies based in California? It's anybody. So if I start marketing to somebody in California, I have to comply.
Right. Yes. It's really about my residency as a Californian. Right. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And so who needs to comply? What's the because again, the gate to comply is different from GDPR to CCPA.
Yeah, it is a little bit different. That's actually one of the main differences. So with CCPA, it's that you obviously market to California's residents or households, and the thresholds are that you have 50 million in revenue, and that's a little murky. There's still questions on that, but we're pretty sure that means for any total amount of revenue, which isn't, I'm sorry, I just said that backward, 25 million in revenue or hold 50,000 records. And 50, that's not very many.
No.
And I mean, a very small company, smaller than 25 million in revenue, could have that many records. I mean, my company could. It doesn't. I don't keep my records that way, fortunately. But I've known companies that did. So I think that there's also that smaller level. The other important thing, I'll say there's three things in. The other important thing is who you're getting your data from. So I think it's the third party vendors, and I'll just use that term kind of generically because it's a slightly different language in GDPR versus CCPA. But I know I chair the San Diego Association of Inside Sales Professionals. And so I'm very familiar with tons and tons and tons of small little vendors who have been scraping the internet. The sales guys are over there buying those suspicious leads. How many times a day do I get one of these random emails? Kathleen, would you like a list of fill in the blank users, your competitors, such and such technology users, with no unsubscribe and no real detail on the bottom, just some suspicious looking outfit. How many people have those records in their databases? I think that, while we're over here looking at the AWSs and the Oracles and the big vendors, we're totally unaware of the fact, and I'll just be blunt, how much crap is in the sales database of not opted in, not legitimate, and stuff that's going to get them in trouble. I think there's going to be a huge data scrubbing effort required.
There was with GDPR. There was this, we don't need to do anything. We don't need to do anything. We don't, the time it's away. They'll extend it. And then it came. And then we had 2 weeks of, it became a joke across Europe about how many people then went basically, and they were scrubbing their databases and asking for the proper opt-in, because in GDPR it's not just a case of actually ticking a box. You have to be able to show the screen where the person has actually opted in. And I mean, we'd actually made a decision as a company 3-4 months before to actually just get out of email. We deleted our database, and RDPO, our data protection officer, which in GDPR you have to have, but with CCPA you don't. Is, you know, anything where we have customer data, she's on it and it's like, we're not holding customer data, or if we have to hold it, you're going to delete it at the end of the project.
Yeah, I actually think that the DPO is something that we should borrow here. I think that's a phenomenal role, and I think that that should be something required.
I think whether it's any organization that is serious about data, and I think data is now one of those things that any company, whether it's health and safety, diversity, inclusion, one of those many things that we should be bothered about is data. And a role should be there as a DPO. It should become it's not a, you know, if you're a small company, it's somebody will have multiple roles, but that DPO role and having somebody that we can go to, our DPO, Julie, you know, we go to, and she's become the font of all knowledge. Can we do this? Can we do this? Okay, how, you know, and that, I think it's been really important. It's been great for us.
Yeah, I think that's important. Yeah, absolutely.
So what do people need to do now to comply? Because we in CCPA, because what's the process that people are going through?
Well, there's a multi-step process. You know, I think you and I had touched on it a moment ago, really scrubbing that database. I had a client that was going through their GDPR process about 18 months ago, and they were so proud of their 100,000 records, and it was like a stamp. It was one of their marketing things. We have 100,000, you know, contacts, and when I got done with them, they had about 20. They had some of them even died. You know, it's just like they hadn't scrubbed that database in 10 years, or re-opted in, and it's like that process of the opting in, which is just terrifying for marketers, because there's a lot of statistics that people, you know, it's easier to what they opt out than they opt in, but it's a real serious thing. And so while that's more GDPR specific, I think we should all be good marketers and go through that process, because we don't know what's going to happen. California is one of the first 3 states to adopt one of these laws, but we know pretty much, I would say 2/3 of the rest of the U.S. will have some similar regulations, and a lot of them will actually mirror GDPR more. Some of them will mirror CCPA, but some of them will go ahead and just take GDPR's language. So we don't know. So you might as well get ahead of it, right? And we'll probably have a federal law probably in the next 2 years, just like GDPR when it pulled everything together. So first, I would say start scrubbing your database. The other is there's a fair amount of work that you have to do for your website, and you need to get that done now. You need to have the ability for someone to check that box, if you will, to say, do not sell my data. That is something physical that you need to have a way for anybody to come on your website and say, do not sell my data. Or you have to say, I absolutely don't sell data. So you have to do one of those. You have to either prove that you don't sell data or have a way to let them not, you know, have them tell you don't sell my data. The next thing is that you really probably need to update your privacy policies, right? Because when's the last time anybody's gone through and, you know, reviewed all the cookies on their website? In fact, it was interesting. I just was doing this for my company, and my tech guy was like, what is this random cookie on here? And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's some system I betaed like 2 years ago. Right. And I, you know, we do that, right? We try things out and stuff like that. So you don't know how many old random defunct cookies that you have. And it's also kind of impressive how many things do have cookies. So update your privacy policy. And that kind of ties in there. You probably then also be updating your cookie policy as well.
And having that on your website and actually publicizing that.
Yes, you got to have that on your website. And so I would say get that on your website. Just think about having that done by January 1, because I think that's good. People are going to be looking for it, right? And they'll be checking you. It's also part of that trust thing. This is going to become an interesting trust aspect. I saw a really interesting Cisco report that was saying that with GDPR, it was actually slowing down the sales cycles, because sales needed to be able to say, yes, we're compliant. Yes, we do that. Yes, we're not going to share the data. Yes, we're not going to share your data with third parties. There's a lot of stuff. So I'd say that's one of the next things, is start looking at those data sharing relationships with your third-party vendors. I think that's going to be critical. I mean, I'm talking both obtaining data as well as what you're doing as far as, passing data down the line, and think about it both ways. So the contracts with third-party vendors, and then last but not least, again, this goes back to the website, is having a way, and I'm sorry, it's another acronym I've slipped into. The DSR is what they call it under GDPR, but the data subject request. So really in either law, you need to be able to accept the request from the consumer who says, all right, show me what you got. That's like, oh my gosh, if you've got a number of different systems, so you've got people over here in CRM, you've got them over in ERP, you've got them probably in some sort of customer service database. How are you going to hook all those together, be able to handle the opt-ins and the opt-outs, but also be able to gather all that together within the time frame, and it's like 30 to 45 days, again, depending on the two laws, but that's still not very long, and then give them, but you also have to vet that they're them. So if you put a request in and you say, hey, I'd like Kathleen's records, you have to be able to prove that you're not, I would be able to say, well, you're not Kathleen.
And I think, and that's the importance of the data protection officer, because they've become a lightning rod for those requests. What about communicating this to the people? Because you're going to have salespeople with spreadsheets with customer data on, so you can scrub the data, but if I come to you and say I want Tim Hughes's data, you've actually got to give me the data on every single spreadsheet that you've got as well.
Exactly. Yeah, all the way down to the spreadsheets, that guy's computer, whatever. And so the sloppiness that we've gotten into of exporting our own little private sales task sheets and stuff like that's got that data, so there's a lot of internal processes. So I think that, one of the compliance complacency things I think that's an issue is it's not just the DPO's problem. This isn't going to be one single general counsel's problem or a DPO's problem. This is really got to be embraced. There's this idea of a culture of privacy that needs to embrace these processes across the organization. And so, and this is the other thing I've been shocked at is sales and marketing. I don't see any AISP, they were all like, really, Kathleen, that's interesting. And so I see no sales. Well, now I'm doing stuff on AISP now, but I'm seeing no real American Marketing Association talks on this. I'm not seeing a lot of buzz in the sales and marketing worlds where I really think that that's such a huge part of it. So I want the sales and marketing people to understand how this is going to change their lives. And, I was at a cybersecurity conference the other day, and the guys were like, oh yeah, we got our vendors, all under control. We'll have our approved vendors. And again, they were talking about AWS and Oracle and the big vendors. And I'm like, guys, you've got these the sales guys are leaking data out the back door, or they're bringing bad data in through, they put their credit card on the internet, and here you go. There's some more bad data. So we've got to change our processes, and that internal culture of privacy has got to take root. So yeah, a lot of internal communication.
So the thing about GDPR was that actually it was a whole bunch of legislation that actually pretty much already existed. But the thing was that if you did something wrong, all you got was a slap on the wrist. And so people just went and did it because it's what we'll do is we'll do it because the slap on the wrist is a cost of doing business. But the penalties, certainly for GDPR, are significant. And, we've had British Airways fined 500 million. I think Facebook the European Union have deliberately gone for big people who've got big deep pockets that they can basically find to get so what are the penalties for GDPR and CCPA?
I think well, and I think that's a good point you were making about GDPR. So we're 18 months in there, and we're starting to see the fines. The other thing that I've heard is that the different data privacy associations, the different DPAs, the different countries, if you will also have their shot at this. So if you're say Facebook and you're doing business in multiple countries, and maybe you've been fined by Germany, well, Ireland can take you on next, right? So it's like you're going to get multiple hits on that, and the same thing will ultimately happen with CCPA. The fines are similarly onerous, and then there's also this right now it's written in that I could take a like a class action suit kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So the consumers can actually pile on top of this and add their voice. So this is still kind of being worked out, but that's some of the things that could make it even more painful.
So I mean, with GDPR, it's 4% of turnover. And I know what some people have decided. Okay, what I'll do is I'll move my data outside of Europe. It doesn't make any difference. It's global turnover. So you actually may be a small division of a larger company, but it's the larger company that gets fined, or it's where the fine is taken into account.
Right.
And the other thing, as you say, is that the consumer is allowed to so this can take companies down.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's what I've been hearing, is that, especially if you're only a $25 million company, this kind of stuff could just obliterate you. And the thing is that there's that reputation as well. And I still see a lot of poo-pooing, like, oh, people still do business with Facebook or British Airways or whatever. But I think we're starting to see that tide turn, that the consumers are going to start to vote with their feet as well. And so you're going to see that not only the fines and the backlash, but I think you'll start to see that it impacts that trust reputation thing, especially if you're not a huge brand. I think you've really got your personal brand to stand on as what I call a smaller.
So there was a lot of talk before GDPR on LinkedIn that this was going to be like Y2K, which was, there was all this Y2K was because it was 19 years ago. So that's
I'm old enough. I remember.
Some people may not actually know what I'm talking about.
They'll have no idea what we're talking about.
With Y2K, there was 10 years of hype about how the world was going to come to a complete standstill because the computer systems hadn't been written in a way to take into the year the year 2000. It was always 19 something. And of course, what happened as we clicked over to the year 2000 was nothing. And everyone, the lights were supposed to go out and Armageddon and stuff. And of course, and a lot of people were saying with GDPR that there's all this hype and we'll click over and nothing will happen. And that's not the case. The amount of email marketing has dramatically dropped. I've used my rights when I get emails from people who I don't know, I will always exercise my right under the GDPR. It's interesting watching what's happened when you go back to the salesperson and say that I wish to invoke my right to remain forgotten, which is something that we have under GDPR. And seeing how suddenly it's a bit like letting a firework off, actually, because they go, oh my God, this is real.
Yeah.
And the thing that I love about it is that quite often I got hit by an email and they said, yes, but you're on this PR database. And I say, I might be on the PR database, but you are responsible for my data. So you take it off, not me. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's been a big shock for people about the fact that if you hold data, we don't, because we don't want responsibility. If you hold data, you are responsible for it.
Yeah, you really bring a really important point up here, Tim, that fines aside, it's the people, it's the consumers that are going to vote. That's the big thing. And I think that's why I brought up the idea of the data subject request. If you're handling a lot of data, that alone could snow you under, right? Yeah. If what was it? There was I think it was a Gartner stat, somebody like that had a stat that said right now, because it's mostly manual, right? We're only starting to develop the technology to automate these things. An average data subject, how to handle that, costs about $2,000. Right. One person. So if I put that in, that to XYZ company, that's going to cost them about $2,000. So you get 10 of those, you get 20 of those, that starts to add up.
And you know, my business partner Adam Gray and I, we were in Singapore, and we had a meeting with a client of ours just before. It was not long before we clicked over with GDPR, and they said, I need to put this in polite conversation. He was a little bit scared because they're an organization of 55,000 employees.
Wow.
And I don't know how many salespeople they've got, but say, you know, a couple of thousand. And each of those salespersons has got a PC, and each of those salespersons got access to Excel. Mm-hmm. How can they actually police this? And I said, you can't. And they thought, well, so they're in this situation where before the cost of business was, okay, I'm not going to bother, I'll just get the fine. But now the fines under GDPR are so big, they can't actually afford to do that. So they were in a situation where they thought that their salespeople couldn't actually do any outbound calling or emailing, and they were just going to have to sit there and wait for stuff to come inbound.
Yeah.
And we had this conversation about, and it's like, well, kind of, you know, there's a whole, we've already talked about all of the things that you do. You need to have a process. You need to have somebody there that's going to take responsibility for this, regardless of whether there's a role or not. And you need to, this is a boardroom issue, and you need to take it seriously.
Yes.
And all of those steps need to be taking place. And then people say, well, so how long is this going to take? And say, well, we're a small company. We had, at the time, we had 10 people. It took us about 5 months. Mm-hmm. And we're 10 people.
You're a small company. Yeah. And I'd say, and I was talking to one of the big law firms that I know that's helping a number of companies through this. And she was saying the folks that had started last October will be ready in January.
Yeah.
So that's what, 13, 14 months.
Because we have we use Google Docs. We have a Google Drive. Had to go through every single file. Has that got customer data on it? Yes or no? What's it doing there? And actually, it's quite nice. And because you go, is that? Oh, we don't need that. We don't need that presentation anymore. Okay, delete it.
It is a good cleansing exercise,
and it's actually great cleansing. Do we need? Why have we still got that? Get rid of it. But what's this? Oh, that was it for this project. Well, what's it doing with all these emails? I don't know.
Oh, it's because we extracted them and sent them over to the mail house so we could, send them off. Or, yeah.
So what should companies be doing now?
I think that data mapping exercise is a phenomenal one. So we call that data mapping, really going through and figuring out what systems have that data in them. And then coming up with criteria. I actually think this is where GDPR has a nicer way of handling it, where you then have, this tick box of like, well, why do I have it? Just like you said. So whether you wanted me to put the fancy language on it or not, that's a great exercise. Map your data, figure out where it all is, and figure out if you have some legitimate reason to be holding it there or processing it there, right? And then educate your people. Like we said, those salespeople, and maybe you have to invest in additional systems. You're not going to be able to manage all of this on spreadsheets. We talked about spreadsheets a couple of times, and this is, I think, a number of different places you had spreadsheets. One is, I think that there are systems or technology systems that will, privacy compliance software that's going to help bigger companies manage this in a more automated way and keep track of all this and know who's responsible for those sections and elements and things like that. And then the tracking for that. Then there's also this point you were making about the salespeople with their spreadsheets. Well, there are, and again, from my inside sales world, it may be that you need to come up with other ways for those salespeople to get their call list together and see what's opted in and opted out, then dumping it down to a spreadsheet. So, maybe you need a system for that. But then I went through an interesting exercise where I had a client who had the sales calling system, the CRM, and then what was the third one? Oh, HubSpot. So we had a CRM, the marketing automation, and then the calling system. And we had to make sure all of those systems, share the opt-ins and the opt-outs so
Right.
that all works. So there's go through that step and make sure all those systems are talking to each other, and that your salespeople have the current data and some way to appropriately outreach, and then they're educated, because really in either world, it's about, are you reaching out? Are you just spamming the world? Are you, let's stop spamming the world. Let's really make sure we have a legitimate reason that we're targeting this prospect. And I loved what you said earlier about, if you can do it, moving more to social media so you don't have to hold that data. And I think we dump stuff conveniently into our CRMs that we use them as a holding place as opposed to a qualified place. So quite often in a sales process, I'll use social media or my sales navigator as my qualifying, here's where my suspects are and my leads. And then once they're qualified, then they might finally get to my CRM, but that keeps my CRM super clean. And I actually have, qualified that person, and, there's a legitimate conversation going on by the time they get there. So then I don't have to worry about, doing that. But I think the other thing is getting into this regular habit of vetting that and cleaning it and saying, okay, because I think in GDPR, there's I can't remember what the time frame is, but you can only keep data records for so long if you haven't touched them recently. So I think everybody should get into that habit. I mean, we should just be doing that anyway. It's good practice.
And the thing about social media is that, I would argue that you should actually move your databases. There is an argument about whether people read the emails that you're sending them anyway. Mm-hmm. The thing is, if you move people to social, if you say, right, we're going to close this down and we're going to have all customer communication through social media, when they follow you, they're opting in or whatever. Mm-hmm. So there is with social media, there's no need to actually track any opt-in. The people will vote with their feet because they'll either follow you or they don't. It's the world's best democracy, and you're able to talk and have a two-way conversation with people rather than just going, our company's great, our company's great, our company's great, our company's great. You could actually talk to customers and have a conversation. I know that's scary for some people, but
that's a whole other podcast we need to do.
It is, yeah. But social media is GDPR and CCPA compliant.
Yeah, exactly.
And so actually that cuts out an awful lot of shit, as I think you said earlier on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal idea. I like that a lot.
Kathleen, it's been really fantastic talking to you. It's been 32 minutes. It's gone really quickly. Remind everybody where they can get hold of you.
You can find me on LinkedIn at Kathleen Glass or on Twitter at Kathleen Glass. Thanks so much for having me, Tim.
Hey, you're welcome. And if anyone's got any questions about CCPA or whatever, they can come to you and
they sure can. Just shoot me a message that I will answer it right away.
Fantastic. Have a great day. It's the end of my day here in the UK, but you have a great day.
You too. Have a good weekend. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, Kathleen. Bye.